In terms of choosing foods at a grocery store, something that comes to mind for me here is organic versus conventional. And particularly when we're thinking about plant foods, I think there's a lot said about herbicides and pesticides. And I'm wondering, during cancer treatment, is thinking about organic versus conventional an important consideration for someone?
I think already a major challenge is even getting enough fruits and vegetables in the diet. But some education that I provide here for people who are worried about exposure to pesticides, herbicides in their product is that at least here in the U.S., there is good monitoring of pesticides and pesticide residues. In a recent report from our U.S. Department of Agriculture, which surveyed, there's over 9,600 samples, and over 92% of them were conventionally grown, so we're not organic. A third of them had no detectable residue in them, and over 99.5% of them had levels that were below the EPA limit. So some education there. It's like, I understand your concern. You don't want it on your products. But when we look at and surveillance of our food system, there's actually very little pesticide residues on many foods.
It seems that sometimes the importance of dose is often overlooked when we're talking about, or someone online is talking about a quote unquote sort of chemical or a compound, and the fact that it's in or on a food means that food is toxic. That's a bit of a leap to make.
And organic does not mean they're not using pesticides or herbicides or fungicides. There is just a certain type that is allowed to be used on them. And in that USDA monitoring, they are not testing yet for organic pesticide residues. So who's to say that there's also not significant residue on that? Sometimes they have to use more because they're not as effective as synthetic pesticides. And again, just want to emphasize the importance of, that's why I really emphasize variety instead of saying you have to get broccoli every single day. It's like exposing your body to a variety of fruits and vegetables, then you are limiting your exposure to, the pesticide that is used on broccoli, for example, that you're having a variety of different foods in your diet.
What do you think about the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15 from EWG? I've been sent this, I don't know how many times over the years. I've even had families and friends send it to me. I think from a marketing point of view, it's particularly compelling. I can understand if you are not someone who's thinking about dose and toxicology and looking at the analysis and how this has been put together and who's put it together. I think you could look at that and just very quickly at face value, accept it and be left thinking, well, this Dirty Dozen, I cannot buy these foods unless they are organic.
That working group, what they're using to create that list is actually that USDA monitoring. Right? So they're using that data that I just said shows that, wow, a third of the foods have no detectable pesticides and the majority are below the pesticide residue limits. They're using that information to create this list. And they even stated very clearly that this is not about dose. All they're doing in creating that list is the number of detectable pesticide residues on those foods. So it is not in regards to dose. Like I said, in that monitoring, over 99.5% of those foods sampled had residues below the EPA limit. So sure, it might have several residues, but they were all well below the limit set by our EPA. I'll admit, I didn't understand that list. And for a while, I was someone who was talking about it, but I learned more about it and also learned a little bit more about this organization. And yes, it is a little bit of fear mongering. And I also see that people are avoiding and then become concerned because organic is so much more expensive and also harder to find some of these. So when we think about, and I think actually Australia has a similar statistic that only 1 in 10 Americans are actually meeting the recommendations for fruits and vegetables. I'm less concerned about the residues and more concerned that most people are not even really eating fruits and vegetables in their diet.
Right. So that EWG, I'm kind of trying to put this together. If they're just reporting the mere fact that these conventional foods had some sort of herbicide or pesticide on them, and they're not considering the dose and whether that is above or below a sort of safe, acceptable limit, and they're just merely pointing it out the fact that these pesticides and herbicides are on these fruits and vegetables. What is their primary intention here? Because as you said, if you go back and look at the actual exposure level, and then you look at the fact that most people are not consuming enough fruits and vegetables, it's quite clear that really people should just be encouraged to eat fruits and vegetables across the board. Is their intention, purely to drive sales of organic produce?
From my understanding, there is some funding from more organic types of organizations or farmers. So I don't know the whole backstory behind it, but I feel like now that I know more about that list, that kind of loses credibility for me in the way that it's discussed and not as clearly outlined about what that list really means. And what might have been more helpful is, okay, so strawberries, they're number one on that dirty dozen. How much pesticide residue is on organic strawberries? That would be very informative for people to know that, okay, well, if I avoid this because this has more number of pesticide residues, how does that compare if I purchased organic? And then they can make a decision rather than just kind of fear mongering with this list. Like, these are dirty. And I hate that word too. They're using it's dirty dozen. There's pesticide residues actually on every single food that's on that list. And there's no consideration for the dose.